How did you find our house in this storm? Janet Willis asked incredulously as Tony Ramirez handed her the hot pizza, his delivery uniform barely damp despite navigating through the worst thunderstorm the city had seen in years. GPS systems were failing throughout the metropolitan area. Other delivery drivers were calling customers to admit they were hopelessly lost, and visibility was so poor that most businesses had suspended delivery services entirely. Your address was a little tricky to locate, ma'am, but I know the area pretty well, Tony replied modestly, standing calmly in the driving rain, while lightning illuminated the remote suburban street that even experienced local drivers had difficulty finding under normal conditions. What Janet didn't know was that the man who had delivered her pizza in 23 minutes during a severe weather emergency was Gunnery Sergeant Tony Ramirez, retired, Marine Force Reconnaissance, who had spent 10 years conducting deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines, navigating through hostile territory using land navigation techniques that didn't require any technological assistance and had once meant the difference between mission success and potentially fatal exposure. Tony Ramirez, 32 years old, had been delivering pizza from Mario's Italian Kitchen in the sprawling metropolitan area of Phoenix, Arizona, for 6 months and 12 days, maintaining the same systematic approach to route planning and terrain analysis that had characterized his 10-year career as a Marine Force Reconnaissance specialist. Every evening at 4:30 p.m., he arrived at work wearing the standard delivery uniform, driving a reliable sedan that he had equipped with backup navigation tools, emergency supplies, and route maps that he studied constantly to maintain perfect knowledge of the complex urban area he served. The pizza restaurant staff knew Tony as a delivery driver who could find any address, who somehow completed deliveries faster than drivers with years more experience, and who never got lost regardless of weather conditions, traffic complications, or customers who provided incomplete or incorrect directions. He had achieved the highest customer satisfaction ratings in the restaurant history, with reviews consistently praising his reliability, professionalism, and ability to deliver orders promptly even during challenging conditions. What his co-workers didn't notice was Tony's automatic route analysis when he received delivery assignments, the way he planned multiple delivery runs with military efficiency, the way he carried backup navigation equipment that went far beyond what typical delivery drivers considered necessary. His approach to pizza delivery was systematic and thorough in ways that suggested training beyond typical food service experience. Tony had chosen pizza delivery specifically because it allowed him to use navigation and route planning skills in civilian contexts that were straightforward and peaceful after 10 years of reconnaissance missions that had required him to navigate through some of the world's most dangerous and complex terrain while gathering intelligence under conditions where navigation mistakes could compromise missions and endanger lives. His Marine Corps career had begun when he enlisted at 18, initially planning to serve in infantry or logistics roles. But when he scored exceptionally high on navigation and terrain analysis evaluations, recruiters had suggested he consider Force Reconnaissance training, one of the Marine Corps' most demanding specialties that combined advanced reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and special operations capabilities. Force Recon training was among the most selective programs the Marine Corps offered. Nearly 2 years of intensive instruction that included everything from advanced land navigation to deep reconnaissance techniques, amphibious operations, and survival training in various environments. Tony had been one of only 12 Marines to complete his training cycle successfully, and one of even fewer to serve multiple operational deployments in reconnaissance roles. Tony's deployments had included reconnaissance missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several locations that remained classified even years after his service ended. He had conducted surveillance operations, gathered intelligence on enemy positions, and provided targeting information for special operations missions that required perfect navigation through hostile territory without technological assistance. Over 3 operational tours, Tony had completed more than 100 reconnaissance missions, earning commendations for navigation excellence and stealth operations. But the psychological pressure of years spent operating alone or in small teams behind enemy lines, constantly assessing threats while gathering intelligence, had eventually become exhausting. When Tony completed his military service, he had been offered positions with private military contractors, security firms, and government agencies that would have used his Force Recon expertise in lucrative consulting roles. But after years of high-stress reconnaissance work, Tony had chosen pizza delivery because it allowed him to use navigation and route planning skills in contexts where mistakes meant late deliveries rather than mission failures or casualties. Phoenix was a complex metropolitan area with more than 1.5 million residents spread across hundreds of square miles of desert terrain that included urban centers, suburban neighborhoods, rural communities, and industrial areas connected by a network of highways, surface streets, and residential roads that challenged even experienced local drivers. Tony's delivery area covered approximately 50 square miles of this complex urban environment. During his 6 months at Mario's Italian Kitchen, Tony had developed comprehensive knowledge of his delivery area that impressed customers, co-workers, and management with its accuracy and completeness. He knew not just street locations, but traffic patterns, seasonal route variations, and alternate pathways that allowed him to complete deliveries efficiently regardless of conditions. Tony, said Mario's manager Lisa Chun during one of their weekly performance reviews, your delivery times and customer satisfaction scores are exceptional. How do you navigate this area so effectively when some of our drivers with years of experience still get lost regularly? Systematic route planning and terrain study, Lisa. I spend time learning the area thoroughly rather than just relying on GPS directions. What Tony didn't explain was that his systematic route planning and terrain study was based on Force Reconnaissance methodologies, detailed terrain analysis, alternative route identification, and navigation techniques that he had learned for operating in hostile environments where technological navigation aids were unavailable or unreliable. The evening when Tony's background was revealed began with weather conditions that created exactly the type of navigation challenge that tested every aspect of his military training. A severe thunderstorm system had moved through the Phoenix area, bringing heavy rain, lightning, and atmospheric conditions that were interfering with GPS satellite signals throughout the region. Multiple delivery services had suspended operations, but Mario's Italian Kitchen continued taking orders because Tony had volunteered to handle deliveries using manual navigation techniques that didn't depend on GPS technology. Tony, said Lisa Chin as the storm intensified, are you sure you can make deliveries safely in these conditions? Most of our drivers are calling in because their GPS systems aren't working. I can navigate without GPS, Lisa. Weather conditions don't affect the routes I use for navigation. Tony's first delivery of the evening was to Janet Willis, a customer who lived in a remote suburban area that was difficult to locate even under normal conditions. Her address was in a neighborhood of custom homes built on large lots with private roads, irregular street layouts, and minimal signage that confused drivers who depended on electronic navigation. The storm had made conditions significantly worse. Visibility was reduced to less than 100 yards. Street signs were obscured by rain and poor lighting, and the GPS system in Tony's delivery vehicle was showing signal loss warnings that left him without electronic navigation assistance. But Tony's Force Recon training had prepared him for exactly these types of conditions. He implemented manual navigation techniques that he had used during reconnaissance missions, terrain association, dead reckoning, and route planning that used landmark identification rather than technological assistance. Tony studied his hand-drawn maps of the delivery area, identified multiple route options based on terrain features and landmark recognition, and began navigating toward Janet Willis's address using skills that had once allowed him to infiltrate enemy territory without detection. During the drive, Tony demonstrated navigation capabilities that went far beyond typical delivery driver experience. He used lightning flashes to identify terrain features, calculated distance and direction based on time and speed rather than GPS readings, and identified route landmarks that remained visible despite poor weather conditions. Tony's navigation was so precise that he arrived at Janet Willis's house in 23 minutes, faster than most drivers could complete the same route under normal weather conditions with full GPS assistance. How did you find our house in this storm? Janet asked as Tony delivered her order, amazed that he had located her remote address when other services had called to cancel deliveries because their drivers couldn't navigate in the storm conditions. Your address was a little tricky to locate, ma'am, but I know the area pretty well. Janet was impressed not just by Tony's successful delivery, but by his calm professionalism during conditions that had overwhelmed other delivery services. Tony, I have to ask, how do you know this area so well? We've lived here for 5 years, and most delivery drivers get lost trying to find our house even with GPS. Experience with navigation and route planning, ma'am. I've always been interested in geography and map reading. But Janet's husband, retired Army Colonel Robert Willis, recognized that Tony's navigation capabilities demonstrated training beyond typical civilian experience. "Son," Colonel Willis said as he joined the conversation, "your navigation through that storm was exceptional. What kind of navigation training have you had?" Tony hesitated, the way he always did when people asked about his military background. "Marine Corps, sir. Some specialized training in land navigation." Colonel Willis understood immediately. "What was your MOS Marine?" 0321, sir. Force Reconnaissance. The conversation that followed revealed Tony's Force Recon background and his reasons for choosing pizza delivery over careers that would more obviously use his reconnaissance expertise. "Force Recon," Colonel Willis said with obvious respect. "That's some of the most demanding navigation training the military offers. Son, why are you delivering pizza?" Tony explained his transition from military service, his desire for work that uses navigation skills in peaceful contexts, and his satisfaction with serving his community in ways that didn't recreate the stress and danger of reconnaissance operations. "Sir, after 10 years of navigation work where mistakes could compromise missions or endanger lives, I wanted to use the same skills in situations where the stakes were manageable." Colonel Willis was impressed by Tony's perspective on his career transition and his application of military skills to civilian work. "Tony, have you considered that your navigation expertise could be valuable for emergency services or search and rescue operations?" The conversation with Colonel Willis led to Tony meeting with Phoenix emergency management officials who were interested in his navigation capabilities for disaster response and emergency coordination. "Tony," said Emergency Management Director Patricia Martinez during their meeting the following week, "your ability to navigate during the storm when GPS systems were failing demonstrated capabilities that could be valuable for emergency response operations." Tony was initially reluctant to return to work that reminded him of military operations, but the emergency management position offered a compromise between using his expertise and maintaining the peaceful daily work that had been essential for his transition from military service. "MS. Martinez, I appreciate the offer, but I chose pizza delivery specifically to step away from high-stress operations." "Tony, this wouldn't be high-stress emergency response. We need someone to develop navigation protocols for emergency personnel and train civilian volunteers in basic navigation techniques that work when technological systems fail." Tony accepted the part-time position as emergency navigation coordinator while continuing his pizza delivery work. The combination allowed him to use his Force Recon expertise to improve community emergency preparedness while maintaining the routine daily work that provided stability and job satisfaction. Tony's training programs for emergency personnel emphasized practical navigation techniques that function independently of GPS technology, map and compass skills, terrain association, and route planning that prepared emergency responders for situations where electronic navigation systems were unavailable or unreliable. The goal, Tony explained to emergency response trainees, is developing navigation confidence that doesn't depend on technology. Electronic systems are valuable tools, but they're not always available during emergencies. Tony's work with emergency navigation training led to his developing protocols that were adopted by emergency management agencies throughout Arizona. His programs prepared emergency personnel while improving coordination between different response organizations during disasters and severe weather events. 6 months after the storm delivery that revealed his background, Tony received recognition from both the Arizona Emergency Management Association and the Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance Association for developing civilian navigation training programs that improve community emergency preparedness. But the recognition that meant the most to Tony came from Mario's Italian kitchen customers who had received reliable delivery service during weather conditions that had shut down other food services throughout the city. "Tony," said regular customer DR, Sarah Kim during one of his deliveries, "I don't know how you manage to deliver pizza in any weather conditions, but I appreciate that we can count on you when other services can't operate." DR, "Kim, reliable service is important to me. I don't like disappointing customers who are depending on food delivery." "Tony, I heard from the Willis family that you have military navigation training. That explains how you're so reliable during bad weather." Tony realized that Dr. Kim's comment reflected exactly the kind of meaningful work he had hoped to find after leaving military service, using his expertise to serve his community reliably while building relationships based on dependable service rather than emergency response. A year after the storm delivery incident, Tony had become Phoenix's community emergency navigation specialist, responsible for training emergency personnel and developing navigation protocols that improved disaster response throughout the region. His programs included civilian emergency preparedness, family emergency planning, and basic navigation skills that prepared community members for situations where electronic navigation systems were unavailable or unreliable. The key, Tony explained to community groups during his navigation training sessions, is understanding that navigation is a skill that can be learned and practiced. People who develop basic navigation confidence are much more prepared for emergencies than people who depend entirely on electronic systems. 2 years after finding Janet Willis's house during the thunderstorm, Tony continued delivering pizza from Mario's Italian Kitchen while also serving as a recognized expert in emergency navigation and disaster preparedness training. His story was featured in Marine Corps publications as an example of how specialized military training could be applied to civilian community service, inspiring other Force Recon veterans to consider careers that use their expertise for peaceful community benefit. Today, Tony Ramirez continues working as a pizza delivery driver while also directing emergency navigation training programs for Phoenix and surrounding communities. He still arrives at Mario's every evening at 4:30 p.m., still delivers pizza to customers throughout the metropolitan area, and still treats food delivery as a serious professional responsibility. But he also trains emergency personnel in navigation techniques, develops protocols that improve disaster response, and teaches basic navigation skills to families who want to be prepared for emergencies. The pizza restaurant where Tony works displays a small framed certificate that reads, "In appreciation of reliable service that connects our community." Tony requested that the recognition focus on customer service rather than individual achievement. Tony's story reminds us that military reconnaissance expertise doesn't diminish when applied to civilian purposes. It enhances. That Force Recon navigation training can improve civilian emergency preparedness just as effectively as it gathers intelligence in hostile territory. That the same systematic navigation techniques used for reconnaissance missions can be used to provide reliable service to community members who depend on food delivery. The next time you order pizza for delivery, remember Tony Ramirez. Remember that the driver bringing your food might have navigation experience gained in situations and places you can't imagine. Remember that they might have chosen food service not because they lack other qualifications, but because they found meaningful ways to apply extraordinary skills to serve their community in peaceful contexts. Sometimes the most important navigation happens not in reconnaissance missions or hostile territory, but on suburban streets where former Force Recon Marines choose to use their expertise to provide reliable service to families who depend on food delivery during challenging conditions. Sometimes the greatest navigation expertise belongs to people delivering pizza rather than conducting military operations, people who've chosen to apply reconnaissance training to civilian community service, ensuring that the skills developed for military navigation can be used to serve community members reliably and safely. We need to recognize and appreciate the skilled navigation professionals among us who've chosen to serve quietly, especially those whose previous service required navigating through dangerous places, so that civilians could receive reliable service in peaceful places. Because true navigation expertise doesn't disappear when uniforms come off, it just finds new applications. And sometimes the most valuable reconnaissance training involves not military missions, but civilian service that ensures the systematic precision developed for Force Recon operations can be used to provide dependable community service and emergency preparedness for everyone.